Hello and welcome to week 3 problem solving session for the NPTEL course on environmental impact assessment. This course is being taught by Dr. Harshit Social Lakra, who is an assistant professor at the Department of Architecture and Planning, Indian Institute of Technology, Roorkee. The session was supposed to be yesterday, but due to some unforeseeable situations, we are conducting this session today. Usually, the problem solving sessions occur on Saturday and on Tuesdays. So I'm Isha Rathore, PMRF and Research Scholar, Department of Architecture and Planning, IIT Roorkee. So a few housekeeping rules before we begin with the session. So please mute yourself for the session. If you have any questions or answers, you can post them in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself for asking questions when asked by the instructor. Let's begin. So the outline of the session is that we're going to look up at the key highlights from each week. That is, we are going to look up at the key takeaways from each of the lecture units, which were covered in this week. We're also going to look up at assignment questions, Q&A, solutions to assignment questions with their explanations, as well as additional question and answers for your practice based on this week's content. We will also look up at week 1 and week 2 question assignment problems for this course. And lastly, if we received any queries from you in the discussion session, we will clarify those queries which we received in this week content. Okay. So week 3, we looked up at EIA procedures, scoping and screening and establishing baseline conditions. So let's begin with the highlights from week 3. So in week 3, we looked up at the first lecture 11 and lecture 12, look up at the World Sustainable Development Timeline. So lecture 11, look up at the World Sustainable Development Timeline between the years of 1970 to 1999. And here we looked up at how the environmental perspective initiatives and events were coming about in the different environmental parameters in the different categories like water, environment, biodiversity, food, disasters which were happening, shift towards renewable and non-renewable, that debate that was happening. So we look up at these different categories and how these perspectives and new rules, policies, and events were happening, which okay, good afternoon. Which and how they influence how these laws, policy, and guidelines were coming up, and the different institutions and organizations which were forming at the different levels. So now these events have been discussed much in detail in the lectures 11 and lecture 12. So if you want to go into detail what each of these law mean and what were the main aims and objectives of it, I would refer you to those to lecture 11 and lecture 12 of the course content. But this is a brief overview of what was discussed in what year, what events happened. Events and the type, sort of like what is the event? Is it an act policy? Is it a publication? Is it a disaster event which happened? Or was there a new trend or pattern which was coming up? So one is that the type of the event, and the second is the category of the event. That is what environmental parameter is this related to. So in 1973, we had the United Nations Conference on Law of the Sea, which happened in New York. We also had the European Environmental Action Plan. The United Nations enacted the Endangered Species Act, which deals with biodiversity. And we had the Chipko movement in India, which was sort of the beginning of the uh, environmental awareness in India and communities, environmental activism coming up in India. Then in 1974, we had the United Nations Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora. So this was an event which looked up at biodiversity. Then we also had the first World Population Conference, which took place in Bucharest, where 135 countries participated. We also had the World Food Conference, which was held in Rome. In 1975, we had an increase in public awareness regarding global environmental threats and activities which catalyze uh, which resulted in effective policy responses. So this was a trend which was coming up, like increased environmental awareness around 1975. And we also had the enforcement of the Convention of International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora, which we saw was enacted in 1974. Then 1976 was the United Nations Conference on Human Settlements, which happened in Vancouver, Canada. 1977 was the Green Belt movement in Kenya, the United Nations Conference on Desertification, which was held in Nairobi. United Nations Water Conference was also held in Mar del Plata. In 1978, we had an oil spill at the Amoco Cadiz on the off the coast of Brittany. So that was the first disaster, which again sort of a sort of uh, triggered the environmental awareness towards these sort of disasters which were happening. And in 1978, we also had the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development relaunch its research on environment and economic linkages. So again, an increase in environmental awareness and different organizations coming up and presenting their research on environmental and the different links between economic activity as well. So this was until 1978. Then 1979, we had the Convention on Long Range Transboundary Air Pollution. We had Robert Stein publish this book on banking on the biosphere. We had the Three Mile Island nuclear accident which occurred in Pennsylvania. So again, this led to an increase of awareness towards the impacts and risks of having a nuclear energy as another form of non-renewable energy. Then we had the World Climate Conference concluded that the greenhouse effect from increased buildup of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere demands urgent international action. So in 1979, the biggest environmental threat was the greenhouse effect and the uh, subsequent sort of effects which were coming out of it. In 1980, we had the World Conservation Strategy, which was presented by the International Union for Conservation of Nature, and they published a section which was titled towards sustainable development. So sustainable development, this term was first introduced uh, through the strategy report. And we also had the Council on Environmental Quality and the United States Department of State release the Global 2000 report to the president. Again, a lot of publications which were happening. 1981 was the Global Strategy for Health for All by the year 2000, which was launched by the World Health Assembly of the WHO, World Health Organization. 1982, we had the United Nations Convention on the Law of Sea again. Then we had the 1983 was the National Conservation Strategy of Australia. Then we had the World Commission on Environment and Development Firms report. 1984 was Bhopal gas tragedy, which was again a disaster leading to this release of poisonous or toxic gas in the air. So this was again, and this happened in Bhopal, India. So this was an event which also led to significant awareness and efforts towards how to have rules and regulations around these kind of developments which are happening and how to reduce their impact on the environment as well as humans as well. Then we had 1984, the drought-induced starvation in Ethiopia. We also had the concept of environment and economics relationship, which came out of this International Conference of Environment and Economics. So this link between how environment and economics are connected. So if you want to read more about them in detail, please go back to lecture 11 and lecture 12 for the sustainable development timeline. I will also share uh, this timeline as well as some details on the what each of these events meant and what was discussed in them. But from an examination point of view, whatever was discussed in the lectures, that is going to come. So, but understanding how all of these initiatives have come up and how different policies, publications, awareness, and events have triggered the movement could help you in understanding this timeline through which how we have reached to EIA in a sense. Then 1985, we had the Antarctic ozone hole, which was discovered. Then we had the World Meteorological Society, United Nations Environment Program, UNEP, and the International Council of Scientific Unions. They met in Vienna to discuss this. We also had Responsible Care, which was an initiative which came out of the Canadian Chemical Producers Association. So how different organizations and communities were coming up and people whose livelihoods sort of were dependent in fields which were facing some sort of backlash or some sort of have negative impact on the environment, they started realizing that and making up committees for being responsible in their activities. So this was again an organization which came out of that voluntary sort of environmental awareness. Then 1986, we had the Conference of Environment and Development IUCN, which happened in Ottawa. Then we have the Chernobyl toxic radioactive explosion in the nuclear station, the Chernobyl nuclear accident, which again led rise to after the 3 Mile island nuclear incident, again Chernobyl. So all of these events sort of led to discussions on how nuclear activity has to be managed and operated, and how its implications and how these accidents should be avoided. Then 1987 is the year in which the Bertland report, published by the World Commission on Environment and Development, Our Common Future, was published. And in this, this sort of popularized the term of sustainable development. However, it was used much previously to before it was published in this report. Then 1987, we also had the adoption of the Montreal Protocol on substances which deplete the ozone layer. So we are in the era where the ozone layer is the biggest environmental problem. We also had the world population reaching 5 billion. We also had the Guidelines for Environment and Development in Bilateral Aid, OECD. Then 1988, we had the initiation of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC. So the IPCC produces these reports on the effects of climate change and how they are being felt. They published this very significant report in 2021, which said that we will discuss 2021 and subsequent things, but they published these significant reports and summary for technical policymakers and people to have to basically tell them how our development is affecting the climate and how action should be taken. Then, as a trend, we also had this use of technology coming in. We had the attention on the destruction of the Amazon forest because of the wildfires which were happening there. Also, the destruction of the world's largest remaining tropical forest, the in which Chico Mendes was involved. And 1989, we had the establishment of the Stockholm Environment Institute. We had the Exxon Valdez runs aground and dumps 11 million gallons of oil into the Prince William Sound. So this was again an oil spill incident which happened. We had, in terms of application, we had this blueprint for a green economy, which presented the central role the environment plays in economic and public policy decision making. So these kind of trends were also coming up and incidents were also happening. Then in 1990, we had the International Institute for Sustainable Development, the organization which was formed. We had the United Nations World Summit for Children, which was held in New York, which linked how environment is going to impact the different future generations. We also had the establishment of Regional Environmental Center for Central and Eastern Europe to address environmental challenges across the region. So this is a summary of all the events which have happened across the globe. Not in much detail, but significant events. So if you look up at US history and Europe history and India history, it is going to be slightly different in terms of the years which were significant. So you can sort and play around uh, with this timeline and see which years were relevant to India, which years were relevant to Europe, and things like that. Then 1991, we had the cod fishery of the Canadian East Coast collapse. We had hundreds of oil fires which were burning because of this war between in the Gulf War, because of the different geopolitical tactics which were being involved, where they lit up these oil wells, since they can't take the oil resources with them, so they just lit up so that the economy of this place will collapse. So this is again how geopolitics play out and things like that. We also had the Caring for the Earth, a strategy for sustainable living, which was the IUCN and UNEP and WWF, which they published, in which they put out 132 actions to increase human well-being and halt the destruction of the environment and the Earth's capacity to support life. We also had the Global Environment Facility, which was created by the World Bank, UNDP, and the UNEP, which give out grants to developing countries for projects which benefit the environment and promote sustainable livelihoods in local communities. So they had this Green Environment Facility, which was created by these three organizations. We also had the UNEC or the ESPO Convention on AIA in 1991. So this was the first AIA specific international treaty, which looked up at transboundary context on like how different countries' emissions and things affect the other countries as well. So it looked up at this transboundary context. 1992, we also had the Changing Course, which was by the which is a publication by the Business Council for Sustainable Development, and it established how business interests benefit. Business interests can be aligned with promoting sustainable development practices. So the trend towards how economy, profit, and sustainable development can be linked started becoming a sort of trend. Then we also had the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, which happened in Rio de Janeiro, where Agenda 21, Convention on Biological Diversity, and Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, was formed. So these are non-binding forest principles. So again, they are discussed much further in detail in the lecture 11. In 1993, we had the establishment of the United Nations Commission on Sustainable Development, which oversees the implementation of Agenda 21. Uh, we also had the World Conference on Human Rights, which happened in Vienna. Then we had the appointment of first United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. So how you see human rights come into pictures in 1993. Then in 1994, we see a large funding under the Global Environment Facility. So this was the facility which was developed by which was giving grants, so developed by the World Bank, UNDP, and UNEP. Then we had the North American Free Trade Agreement come into force. We also have the agreement, North American Agreement on Environmental Cooperation, the International Conference on Population and Development in Cairo, the United Nations Convention on Desertification, and the United States Agency for International Development. It redefined that foreign assistance programs in terms of sustainable development. So giving funding to have these like Indo-US or those kind of programs to have like a foreign assistance program. Then 1995, we have the World Trade Organization, which was established. We had the World Summit for Sustainable Development, which happened in Copenhagen. We had the international community commitment to address the problem of poverty. And we had COP1 or Conference of Parties. So in 2021, we had COP21. So in 1995, we have COP1, which was Conference of Parties, which were all these countries which were signatories to the United Nations Climate Change Convention. So they come together and they discuss the different environmental problems or issues which they feel are significant. So in 2023, I think we had the COP 27, 26 or 27, I'm not sure right now. Then we also had in 1995, we had the Fourth World Conference on Women, which was held in Beijing, which acknowledged the issues of women rights and status. So again, human rights becoming a trend in this particular time period. Then, 1997, we also had the United Nations Conference on Human Settlements again, which happened in Istanbul. So again, these conferences keep repeating themselves, but the agendas and aims with which they keep, which are discussed in all of these different years in which they are happening are different. So refer back and maybe make a note of what was discussed in what conference. We also had the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation Ministerial Meeting on Sustainable Development, which happened in Manila. So they looked up at sustainable cities, cleaner production technology, sustainability of the marine environment. So this was what was discussed. And then 1997 is also significant because of Kyoto Protocol, which was discussed in the Conference of Parties, the third Conference of Parties. And this year in which there was like a first legally, this is the first legally binding climate treaty which came out of Kyoto Protocol, which is known as the Kyoto Protocol, basically. So in this, the developed countries, they said that they're going to reduce their emissions by an average of 5% below whatever their levels were in 1990s. And they're going to establish a system to monitor their country's progress. That is how much reduction in emissions has been achieved, what were the 1990s level. And there was no compulsion on developing countries, but the developed countries have to meet this reduction of 5% from their 1990 levels. They also discussed this carbon market, which is for countries to trade emission units and encourage sustainable development in developing countries. So this is based on a system called cap and trade, in which the developed country can say that they are going to reduce their emissions in a developing country and fund projects such that these developing countries have this kind of infrastructure, and they can basically buy and sell. So they can take their emission credits, but they sort of give them some sort of monetary compensation which helps in their development. So this is the cap and trade system. Then 1998, we also had the Aarhus Convention of 1998. We will see the Aarhus Convention later on also. Then lecture 12, in lecture 12, again, we are discussing the World Sustainable Development Timeline, but this is between the years of 2000 to 2021. So because this course was filmed in 2021, so we have only discussed the timeline until 2021. So in your examination, only whatever is discussed in the lecture units is going to come. So whatever happened beyond 2021 is not going to come. And whatever is not discussed in these courses, in the lecture as well. We did look up at what sort of development has happened in week one towards the end, which was the additional context in terms of what development had happened, like COP21 and further on, like those kind of developments we looked up. So in 2001, we had the World Trade Organization meeting, which was the Doha Ministerial Declaration. 2002, we had the World Summit on Sustainable Development in Johannesburg. Then 2003, we had the United Nations Decade of Education for Sustainable Development. In 2004, Wangari Maathai was the first environmentalist to win the Nobel Peace Prize. Then 2005 was Kyoto Protocol, the Millennial Ecosystem Assessment. Hurricane Katrina hit the US. We have Z and Z plus. Then 2007 we had United Nations Climate Change Conference, which happened in Bali. 2008 was the World Food Price crisis, which you would have all heard about. Then the UN Environment-led Green Economic Initiative was also launched, and the World Glacier Monitoring Service report was also published. 2009, we saw this increase in the role of internet and campaigning and raising awareness and all of these online signatures and petitions kind of emerging trend you would have seen. Then we had the multi-year sea ice disappearing from the Arctic Ocean. We had the G20, which agreed to phase out fossil fuel subsidies. That is the subsidies which they were giving to countries which were still using fossil fuels. Then we had the COP 15, which is Conference of 15 session of Conference of Parties to the UNFCCC. The Philippines also experienced their tropical typhoon, which was Ketsana. And we had the UN summit, which was on climate change, which was hosted by Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. 2010, we had the COP 16 session of Conference of Parties. So this was COP 16, actually. This is wrong. We had the Nagoya Protocol on access and benefit sharing, which was discussed. 2011, we had the Japan earthquake, which hit at a 9 magnitude on Richter scale. So this was again a disaster which happened because Japan lies on this earthquake lines, basically seismic plates and tectonic plates, those movement lines. So it keeps experiencing earthquakes, but this was a significant effect earthquake which hit, and it led to the development. It led to further rescue and rehabilitation sort of efforts which were being done. Then the world population reached 7 billion in 2011, and we had the Durban Climate Change Conference. 2012, we had United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development in Rio de Janeiro, and the Doha Climate Change Conference, that is COP 18. Then 2013 was COP19 in Warsaw, Poland. 2015 we have COP21, which was the Paris Agreement. 2016 we had the Sustainable Development Goals, which were published by the United Nations. So we have these number of Sustainable Development Goals, which we now refer to, and which the United Nations is also trying to achieve in terms of the projects. And so things like no poverty and life on land, well-being, innovations and development, those kind of sustainable goals. Then we also had the Kigali Amendment. 2018, we had COP24, where the rules for Paris Agreement were decided, which were discussed in COP21. Then 2019, we had the UN Chief Plans the Climate Action Summit and COP25 to finalize the guidelines which are going to govern the Paris Agreement. 2022, we had COP26, the proposal for COP26. In 2021, the nations updated their pledges ahead of the COP26. And we had the IPCC 2021 report on climate change. So this was a significant report which said that how the extremes are becoming, like the extreme events like heat waves and cold waves are becoming so frequent across all of the world regions. Every country is experiencing heat wave events which are happening, cold wave events which are happening. Also, environmental environmental features like typhoons, floods, all of these are becoming more significant, and the frequency of these events are also increasing over the decades. In COP26, which happened in Glasgow, they also discussed this 1.5-degree goal. That is the surface temperature of the Earth should not go beyond 1.5 degrees. So they have these different scenarios in which if the temperature goes above this particular limit, which is currently set at 1.5 degrees, it is not reversible. So those kind of to meet, so countries have to pledge to meet these goals uh, to keep uh, to keep the earth and the environment alive, basically. So this was what was discussed until 2021. So further to 2021 is not relevant or from the examination point of view, but we did discuss the timeline in the first week itself in terms of India as well as the world both towards the end. So you can refer to that YouTube lecture for later on. Then lecture 13, we looked up at EIA law, policy, and institutional arrangements for EIA systems. So this lecture is generic, whereas lecture 14 and 15 are towards air and other systems. So in this, we look up at trends in the development of the AIA system. So we see how different wider and new areas are coming up, and there's multiple levels of decision making. That is, you have systems where you can do a local AI, and then you also, if it's a transboundary context, you have to do an international sort of decision making and policies which affect these things. So multiple levels of decisions are involved now. Then we have systematic procedures coming into play, improved quality control, compliance, and enforcement, how different integration considerations are made, that is, in terms of biophysical features, social risk, health, and other aspects. All of these are considered now. We also have extended temporal, that is, total or cumulative effect, and spatial framework. So if it's transboundary, ecosystem level effects, global change, all of these are now incorporated when you do an EIA study. We also have strategic environmental assessment, or the SEA, where we look up at the environmental assessment of policies, plans, and program proposals. That is how they are going to be strategically implemented, and whether they have some sort of repercussions or negative aspects associated to them. So strategic environmental assessment has also become very common. Then we have incorporation of sustainability perspectives and principles, and there's a greater linkage between planning, regulatory, and management frameworks, and how EIA has institutionalized in all of these different countries in which EIA is being done. So, like, there's a proper procedure and submission requirements and things which needs to be submitted. So, it's been institutionalized, and different agencies and organizations are associated at different levels when an EIA study is being done and approved. So we also looked up at foundations of an effective EIS system. So an effective EIS system is one which is clear, which gives you a clear basis in law and regulation. So everything is spelled out legally and correctly. That this is the requirement. This is what needs to be measured, both in quantitative and qualitative terms. It's been stated out clearly in law and regulation. There's a clear statement of objective and requirements. There's mandatory compliance and enforcements. There's comprehensive scope of applications to proposals with potentially significant impacts. There are prescribed processes of steps and activities and provision for public consultation and access to information, and linkages to project authorization, permitting, and condition setting. So these are the foundations of an effective EIS systems. So, from a framework point of view, or from a legal perspective, there's a broad definition of environment and effects, and duty to avoid, mitigate, or remedy adverse effects arising from an activity. So, you need to clearly define what do you mean by environment, what are the effects, what are the stakeholders, what are the parameters which are being considered. So, there should not be like a broad definition, although we consider broad definition, but then you need to also give a very detailed assessment of what effects are being felt on what environmental parameter. And what in terms of effects, you also mentioned what are you avoiding, what are you mitigating, and how are you addressing all of these effects which are coming out of the development activity in your proposal reports. Then the requirement for an EIA report to specify mitigation measures which needs to be applied, the procedural guidelines on compliance and good practice in applying EIA arrangements, and giving reasons for decisions on proposals which are subject to EIA. So all of these are considered from a legal perspective. Then we looked up at key elements of enabling environment for EIA and sustainability. So key elements which help this EIA system and sustainability studies to work well is a functional legal design. So you have a legal system which is running. There's a rule and a code and everything which are there, and you need to follow it. So a functional legal design is there. Sound administration and flexible policy making stakeholders which understand the aims of the process and its potential benefits. So people and system which support EIA and sustainability efforts. Political commitment, political parties also understanding and sort of committing to the need and the requirement for EIA. Institutional capacity for implementation, even though if a study is being done, there's not institutional capacity which sees that implementation is being carried out exactly as was stated in the proposal, will lead to a not so effective implementation of the proposal plan. And then the EIA study is just a study on the paper if there's no institutional capacity which can check whether the implementation is correct or not. So this implementation checking and capacity for people who are going to check is also an enabling factor. Then adequate technical capacity, data and information, public involvement to give you uh, different feedback and opinions at different points and different stages of EIA, and of course, financial capacity to go through all of this process. Okay, so these are enabling features or elements which enable EIA and sustainability studies. Then also conceptual understanding of law and policy. So law is any formal document which is administered by a judiciary, which can be judged basically, and policy is a reference document for the working of government and administration, and which is administrated by the government. So laws are established in order to bring justice to society and equality to society, and policy is to achieve specific goals by the government. So this is the differentiation between law and policy. So also in law and policy, if you don't adhere or you don't follow a law, it is punishable by the legal system. Whereas adherence to policy is not, it's it does not lead to like severe punishment. There can be like faults and uh, what do you call it? Some sort of monetary compensation that you have to give. Uh, but laws, not following laws are punishable, but policies are sort of recommendation of voluntary sort of documents, which does not lead to severe punishments. So EIA takes place within this legal and or policy framework situation in different countries and international agencies, which help in the EIA system being effective in all of these countries. Okay, so an example, types an example of EIA legal provision. So you can have general environmental law. So something which looks up at the generic environment, not goes much into very specific uh, specific management techniques is a generic environmental law. So something like your NEPA or the Environmental Protection Act of 1986 in India. So these are the examples of general environmental law. Whereas comprehensive resource management and planning law looks up at very specific and gives you a comprehensive guidelines of how things and resources need to be managed, how planning should be done, what are the factors you should consider, what are the benchmarks or limits which needs to be followed, and things like that. So these are very comprehensive and detailed. If you open up New Zealand RMA, you can see what I mean by this very very comprehensive and very detailed specific laws. So those are these kind of laws. Then enabling or framework EIA law is like the European directive, and then comprehensive or prescriptive EIA law is like the CAEA. So you can again refer back to the slide where this was discussed, and Harshit Ma'am explains what these laws also mean in a much greater detail. We will also look up at a few of these laws as we move progress towards the subsequent weeks. We will see what each of these, a few of these actually laws and frameworks we have discussed further as well. So, moving on to lecture 14, we looked up at law, policy, and institutional arrangements in terms of air systems. So, this is part two of lecture 13, where we looked up at general statements. So, here we have key concepts of policy. So, we look up at the definitions of what policy, policy instrument, governments, and cluster of policy means. So, policy is any statement of intent to change the behavior in a positive way. Policy instrument means the means or the tools or specific measures which needs to translate that intent of the policy into action. So anything which helps you in moving from paper to actionable status as a policy instrument. Then governance is the process where societies or organizations make important decisions and determine whom they're going to involve and how they're going to render account. So how they are basically going to hold which how the process, how decision making is going to happen, and how different societies and organizations and agencies are going to be involved, and how they are going to be held accountable if something does not go as per the plan. And then cluster of policy is collection of policy instruments which are all designed to achieve a common goal or a set of intentions. So these are the basic definition of policies. So, policy instruments can again now be of two types. So, primary environmental policy and secondary environmental policy. So, primary ones are those which have environmental policy goals, whereas secondary environmental policy have primary non-environmental goals. So, it can be something which is associated with aesthetic value or which is associated with economic value or social value. So, those are secondary environmental policies which do not have a direct or their primary goal is not an environmental goal. Okay, now policy instruments can be aimed at various mechanisms. So they can be alternatives which can be amended, alternatives which can be changed, and outcomes which can be influenced. We also have different types of policy instruments. So we have legislation and regulatory policy standards. We have market-based instruments, financial incentives or disincentives, voluntary approaches, treaties and agreements, international soft laws, voluntary agreements, research and development, information instruments. So these are things which can help in achieving a particular goals. Now, according to the intention of the policy, different type of policy instruments can be used. So if there's something like the resettlement of if the policy is to basically resettle people because of a construction of a dam, so the policy instrument could be financial incentives or land-based incentives where these people are being resettled in a new location. They're given new land and some sort of compensation to start their new life. So it's a financial incentive-based policy instrument which is being used. So just for an example on how policy instruments are used. So based on the intention of the policy, the different type of policy instruments can be used. Okay. Then some forms of governance approaches and policy instruments which are relating to air. So to mitigate air pollution and other related problems, we include technology or emission standards. So we have a command and control sort of standards which say this much emission, the air should hold this much pollutant or this much type of pollutant. We will see further as well. Then we can also have planning regimes. We have market interventions, public information, and cooperative forums, including international agreements. So market interventions can be, for example, if you have a certain kind of let's say chimney, you can reduce, you can make certain interventions, or you can penalize products which lead to more pollutants being released out of that product. So those are market interventions. Public information is where you aware, make the consumers aware about the different type of technical things associated with the products or things, and then public information and awareness leads to them sort of cutting back on certain products. Okay. And then we have cooperative forums where different agencies and things, they cooperate and sort of brainstorm like a think tank on how they can mitigate air pollution. So again, the intention and what works best sort of things are being used to determine what our policy instruments are going to be used for particular problems. So, for example, we have a global environmental agreement. So, these are relevant in terms of climate change, stratospheric ozone depletion, and persistent bioaccumulative toxic chemicals. So, different environmental agreements relating to each of these categories is mentioned. Uh, so, for example, you have the UNFCCC, which is the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So, they have their certain aims and intentions, and they have their own policy instruments, which you can look at in detail, and different other uh, goals and what kind of environmental agreements lead to those arrangements. So, next we looked up at lecture 15, which is again on air. So we have advisory air quality standards, which are basic. So advisory is basic what is being advised to be used. So these are voluntary air quality standards. So these are the World Health Organization guideline values, which gives you the sort of limits or benchmarks, which are again voluntary. So these are not mandatory, whereas in certain places you have mandatory air quality standards as well. So advisory ones include your EHS, Environment, Health and Safety guidelines as well, your Good International Industry Practice, GIIP. So these are all in terms of air. Then mandatory air quality standards include your US standards, the EU limit values. For India, we have the National Ambient Air Quality Standards as Air Prevention and Control of Pollution Act of 1981. So, in terms of the how these standards work, so there's a benchmark or limit on the type of pollutant and their concentration being present. Now, these concentration can be measured in either mass of the substance per unit volume, mass per volume. So, this is in micrograms per cubic meter of air. So, how much grams of a pollutant is present per cubic meter of your air? That is one unit or one concentration measurement which we use when we measure these pollutants. The other which we use is volume of substance to volume of air. So this is in parts per million ppm or parts per billion ppb. So how much part of pollutant is basically like how much part of that air is basically pollutant. So the first part. So volume of the pollutant to volume of air. So it gives you parts per million or parts per billion, whatever is the volume of air being used is. Okay, so these are the concentrations in which we measure air pollutants. Now, for example, now this is a comparison of different standards and what time these are being measured. So we have key three pollutants. We have nitrogen dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and particulate matter 2.5. So, what average time? So, this is the time frame in which this is being mentioned. This is the World Health Organization standard on the limit which needs to be maintained. Now, this is again an advisory air standard and not a mandatory one. This is a mandatory one for US. This is mandatory one for EU or European countries, and this is for India. So for 1 hour, when the pollutant is being measured for 1 hour, the World Health Organization suggests this pollutant content to be 200 microgram per meter cube, whereas for US it's 100 ppb or 118 microgram per meter cube, and for EU is 200 microgram per meter cube. Uh, in India, we don't do this 1 hour based measurement. We do an annual measurement, and we say that measurement, we give that measurement. We don't do the 1 hour based one. So it also gives you the kind of measurement techniques and what kind of standards are available. So similarly, for the other kind of pollutants also, this comparison is being presented. So again, like now this is a comparison which is being done by a particular author in a particular book. But if you see at what the standards reflect, so this is what the UK standard basically says. So in terms of how, for example, in UK, nitrogen dioxide on all sort of receptors, whereas sulfur dioxide in areas where crops are being grown, in areas where there's forest and natural vegetation, in areas where there are sensitive lichens. So different kind of standards are available. Now this is for vegetation and ecosystems. That is, they define the receptors as well on which uh, in the area basically, and the time period for which they are being mentioned. This is for limit values for ecologically sensitive areas, which is provided by the Indian National Ambient Air Quality Standards under the CPCB. So it gives you similar kind of ecologically sensitive areas values as well. That is what values need to be maintained in ecologically sensitive areas. So you can refer to this PDF if you want to see what does the standard actually say. So in industrial, residential, and rural areas, so sulfur dioxide concentration should be annually 50. I think it's microgram per meter cube only. And whereas in ecologically sensitive areas, it should be less than 20 microgram per meter cube. So similar sort of values are available for Indian context as well. Then, in terms of odor guidelines and standards, so several countries have legislations around odor and the measurement of odor. So, for example, in the UK, they measure odor concentration in terms of OUE, which is the European Odor Unit. So, one OUE is the threshold where 50% of the members of an odor panel can detect an odor in laboratory conditions. So, this is the unit basically, and they describe so guidelines around odor consider five factors, which are the FIDOL factors. So this is made up of basically the initial letter of each of these uh, factors. So F is frequency, that is how often an individual is exposed to this odor. I is intensity, that is the intensity or the perception of the strength of that odor. D is duration, that is the overall duration uh, of the odor that that individual is being exposed to. Uh, then O is odor unpleasantness, that is how unpleasant that odor is, and you can have different type of measurements and things being mentioned. And then L is location, that is the type of the location at which that odor is coming. So what type of land use is there, what type of activities are being performed in the vicinity of that area. What is the tolerance and expectation of the receptor or the person who's there. So these kind of factors are considered when we do this odor detection also. So this is all. And then we have international guidance and standards around the emission limits and standards. So we have the USA Pollution Prevention Act, the EU Industrial Emission Directive, the IFC Environment, Health and Safety Guidelines. Then we also have certain Indian guidelines like the Bharat Stage BS emission standards. So these standards were laid down by the government to regulate the output of air pollutants which were coming out of your motor vehicles, and they mandated vehicle makers to manufacture and sell a certain kind of vehicles after a particular year. You would have seen the vehicles being upgraded during your in the past few years, basically because of the this limit of emissions being imposed on the motor vehicles as well. So that is one Indian standard. Then we also have standards around hazardous chemicals and the regulations. So we have the Seveso 3 directive, which is again on how technological disaster risk can be reduced in terms of protecting the environment, health, and the economy. You can read more about them later as well. So this was all which we discussed in this week's context. If you want to read about them further, you can refer to those lecture units as well. I will share the timeline and details on those timeline, but that is for your own um, that is not something which will come in the examination. In the examination, whatever has been discussed in the lecture units itself will be considered. Okay. So now let's if anybody has any queries so far, they can unmute themselves and maybe speak or put it in the chat box before we go on to the next session, which is the Q&A. Okay. So, okay. Okay, so let's move on to the next session, which is the Q&A. So I'm going to put some questions out on the screen and I'm going to ask you to put the answers. So these are all objective-based questions. So you can put the answers in the chat box. I will regulate the chat box and we can discuss on what the answers mean and what is the correct answer. Okay. So the first question is Rio de Janeiro Earth Summit 1992 is an example of A, non-binding instrument or B, binding instrument. So again, from an examination point of view, years in which particular summits or events which have happened are important. You can remember them in the order in which they have happened. Significant ones are basically more important than normal ones. So something significant which happened in a particular year is more likely to come. Okay, so we have one answer. Okay, we have another one. Okay. Okay, so it is an example of non-binding instrument actually. So, so binding instruments are basically in which countries have signed signatories and they're basically countries have signed the agreement and then they have to meet certain standards. They have to meet certain objectives and intentions. But the Rio de Janeiro Earth Summit of 1992 was not a binding instrument. No binding instrument was basically signed in that convention. Okay. So again, terminologies and the main aims and objectives of particular summits and the year specifically is important. Okay, moving on. So is the statement true or okay? The statement environmental impact assessment as a national instrument shall be undertaken for proposed activities that are likely to have a significant adverse impact on the environment and are subject to a decision of a competent national authority is covered under which principle of the United Nations UNFCCC Forum for Climate Change. Okay. I think this is a slightly more detailed question, I would say. So, Principle 17 is the United Nations Framework for Climate Change, UNFCC. It had these different principles which were discussed, and then each of these different principles have a particular statement which and a particular basically key area in which it is being talked about. So, Principle 17 talked about environmental impact assessment being done. So it says environmental impact assessment as a national instrument shall be undertaken for proposed activities that are likely to have a significant adverse impact on the environment and are subject to a decision of a competent national authority. Okay, so I think this was a slightly detailed question. So let's move on to the next one. So this is slightly simple. Chernobyl accident is related to which of these events? A, earthquake, B, tsunami, C, toxic radioactive explosion, or D, fire. Okay, we have one answer. Okay, more coming up. Okay, this is relatively simple, I would say. People can answer this. Okay, so Chernobyl is associated with the nuclear disaster. So this is associated with toxic radioactive explosion. Okay, so C is the correct answer. Okay, moving on to next question. Under which reference the term cap and trade is used? Is it A, emission trading, B, forex trading, C, energy trading, or D, all of the above? Okay, we have an answer A. Okay, so A is the correct answer. So basically, in cap and trading, what happens? There's an emission cap which is being set up by the different countries and by an international under an international agreement. So you basically have to limit your emissions to a particular value. And if, let's say, emitter 2 produces more emissions, and emitter 1 does not produce a similar number of emissions, so it can sell its emission space, which is this much value. It can sell it to emitter 2 and take up its excess emissions. So basically, it is because emitter 2 will be penalized if it does not meet this emission limit, and emission 1 is already is at a good stage where it doesn't have to pay anything, but it has this access space or an access value which it can gain out of taking somebody else's emission. So it's this selling and buying of so basically selling capping this cap and trade which is happening. So because of this cap which is there, emissions cap, trade is possible. So it's associated with this emission trading concept. Okay. So moving on, match the group one with group two and choose the correct option. So what is in group one, we have the environmental protocol or agreement or framework, and in group two, we have the provisions which were discussed in particular protocols or agreements or frameworks. So, so again, this is what is important basically. What are the provisions and what is the aims and intent of important protocols, agreements, or acts, which we saw in the timeline. So these are group one has all of most of the significant protocols and agreements which have happened over the years. So we have the Montreal Protocol, the Paris Agreement, the REDD, and Kyoto Protocol. Okay, so the Mon okay, okay, we have one answer which is correct. So the Protocol looked up at phasing out substances which were depleting the ozone layer. So the chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs, it looked up at phasing all of these substances uh, out of your daily use items like your ACs and things. How refrigerants were also changed. So Montreal Protocol looked up at phasing out substances which deplete your ozone layer. Then we had in the Paris Agreement, we have this limit of global warming to be below 12, below 2, and it's preferably to 1.5 degrees Celsius, where we want to limit global warming such that it does not increase the Earth's temperature above by 2 degrees, and preferably less than 1.5 degrees. So that was Paris Agreement. So Q matches with 4. Then REDD looked up at reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation. So R matches with 1. And then Kyoto Protocol looked up at emissions trading, and it gave the concept of emissions trading because particular benchmarks were being set on how much emissions industries can do. So S matches with 2. So the correct answer is B, which is P matches with 3, Q matches with 4, R matches with 1, and S matches with 2. Okay. So, but this is an important question, and questions like this can come out of the timeline. So please understand and remember what are the main years and what are the main intentions out of protocols, frameworks, and agreements. Okay, moving on. Kyoto Protocol is related to A, ozone depletion, B, hazardous waste, C, climate change, or D, nuclear energy. We have an answer C. Okay, another C. Okay, so Kyoto Protocol is associated with climate change, that is limiting the surface temperature of the Earth well below 2 degrees centigrade, the rise in the surface temperature to be well below 2 degrees and preferably to be within 1.5 degrees, 1.5 degree increase. Okay, so it's associated with taking measures for climate change. Okay, moving on to question 7. With respect to emission reduction goal, what does NDC stand for? Is it A, nationally determined contributions, B, national development contribution, C, noble development contributions, or D, naturally determined contributions? Okay, we have A and D as answers. Okay, we have another A. So the correct answers is A, nationally determined contributions. So these are basically the NDCs are nationally determined contributions, which the United Nations Framework which is under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC. So, and this was designed in the Paris Agreement. So the countries basically pledged to reduce the emissions level. So they set an emission reduction goal, and each of the nations will have their own different national determined contributions which they would like to make. So that is the NDC. So for example, in its NDC, nationally determined contribution, the UK committed to reducing the economy-wide greenhouse gas emission by at least 68% by 2030 compared to its 1990 levels. Okay, so these are contributions which different countries are putting forward, saying that this is what, as a country, we are going to contribute towards reducing the global emissions. Okay, so NDC stands for Nationally Determined Contribution. So A is the correct answer. Moving on, question 8. Which of the following will qualify for green list? A, Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora. B, Framework Convention on Climate Change. C, Convention for the Protection of Ozone Layer. Or D, Convention on Control of Transboundary Movements of Hazardous Waste and Their Disposal. Okay, so the correct answer is Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora. So the IUCN has a green list, which in which programs and conventions are assigned. These are basically the projects or programs which work towards equitable and environmental protection and conservation measures. So the program or the Convention of International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Flora and Fauna, it falls under the IUCN's Green List. Okay, moving on. Which of the following powers are conferred to the MOEFCC by the EPA Act of 1986? The options are first, environmental clearance, second, eco-sensitive zone, three, coastal regulation zone, and fourth, infrastructure development. So, which of the following powers are being conferred under the Environmental Protection Act of 1986? So MOEFCC is Ministry of Environment, Forest Conservation and Environment, Forest and Climate Change, I think. So which of the following powers does this have? The Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. Okay, we have B's coming in. And we have a D as well. Okay, so under the uh, Environmental Protection Act of 1986, the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change have the powers of environmental clearance. It can give environmental clearance to projects which use the site in forest regions or ecologically sensitive areas. So it can give environmental clearance. Then it also has powers in eco-sensitive zone. That is, eco-sensitive zones also fall under the administration of Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. And it also have powers in coastal regulation zones. It does not have a say in infrastructure development, but 1, 2, and 3 are the powers which this particular organization, a particular ministerial department, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change of India, has under the Environmental Protection Act of 1986. So B is the correct answer. So moving on, match the following with examples. So in group 1, we have legal provisions, and in group 2, we have the examples. So we looked up at these in our division as well, review of the previous this week's lecture content. So the type of environmental law and the examples. Okay, so the general environmental law includes a law like NEPA and Environmental Protection Act of India. Then comprehensive resource management and planning laws include laws like New Zealand RMA, Resource Management Act. So Q matches with one. Then enabling or framework EIA laws like the ones in the European directive. So R matches with two. And comprehensive or prescriptive EIA law is the example of this law is the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act or CAEE. So it matches with three. So the correct answer is C, which is P matches with 4, Q matches with 1, R matches with 2, and S matches with 3. Okay, so moving on. So simple state true or false. Primary environmental policies are the ones whose primary goals are concerned with environment, while secondary policies are the ones whose primary goals are non-environmental. Is this statement true or false? So we looked up at environment policy instruments. So these are the examples. Okay, we have uh, we have a true and a false. Both options have come up. Okay, we have another A. Okay, so the statement is true. Primary environmental policy includes environmental policy as goal, whereas secondary environmental policy will have their primary goal will not be an environmental goal, so it will be a non-environmental goal. So this statement is true. So A is the correct answer. So moving on to question 12. Match the terms with its meanings. So again, we looked up at the terms and their meanings or definitions. So on the right, group 1, we have terms related to policies and policy instruments, whereas in group 2, we have their meanings or descriptions. Okay, we have an answer D. Okay, so the correct answer is D. So cluster of policy is collection of policy instruments which are all designed to achieve a common goal or set of intentions. So P matches with 2. Then command and control includes technologies, emissions, or ecosystem restoration standards, record keeping and reporting requirements, or limits on manufactured trade or use of specific chemicals or products, each of which are implemented through permitting and enforcement programs, hence the name command and control. So these are policy instruments which exert a sort of command and control based on the statements or standards and limits which they have set up on either the producer or consumer. So that is command and control. So Q matches with 3. Then we have planning regime. So these are basically strategies or actions which are designed to achieve certain standards or objectives or attain emission ceilings combined with analysis and environmental impact assessments. So any sort of strategy or action plan which helps you achieve the goals of your policy. So that's planning designs is that type of a policy instrument. So R matches with 4. And then market interventions are basically includes your economic instruments such as your taxes, fees, or market for tradable emissions rights, as well as loans and subsidies. So S matches with 1. So basically, so the correct answer is D, which uh, where P matches with 2, Q matches with 3, R matches with 4, and S matches with 1. So these are policy terms and their policy instruments and their meanings and examples in terms of an air pollution control sort of example. Okay. Moving on to question 13. So, state true or false, the Montreal Protocol of 2009 addressed stratospheric ozone depletion and became the first United Nations convention to be ratified by all United Nations member states. Is this statement true or false? Okay, so we have A. So we have two A's. We have another true. Okay, so the statement is true. The Montreal Protocol was addressed that stratospheric ozone uh, is being depleted, and this was the first convention which was consented or ratified by all of the United Nations member states. So the statement is true. Moving on, select the mandatory law, policy, or guidelines on air quality for the country in the following options. So we you have to find which one is a mandatory policy for air quality control and not a advisory policy. So we have options A, National Ambient Air Quality Standard as Air Prevention and Control of Pollution Act of 1981, B, WHO guideline values, C, Environment, Health and Safety EHS guidelines, and D, Global International Industry Practice GIIP. Okay, so we have two A's. Okay, another A. Okay, so A is the correct answer. So, the National Ambient Air Quality Standard as Air Prevention and Control of Pollution Act of 1981. So, this is the Indian mandatory air quality standard, whereas B, C, and D are all advisory air quality standards. So, A is the correct answer. So, the key term here was mandatory. Okay, so moving on to the next question. What is the full form of ppm with respect to air quality? Is it A, parts per million, B, production per million, C, pollution per million, or D, particulate matter per million? Okay, so we have an answer A. Okay, so A is the correct answer. So ppm stands for parts per million, and it's the expression of concentration of the air pollutant which is present in the in a particular volume of air. So that much parts per million volume of the air. Okay, so ppm is parts per million. A is the correct answer. Moving on, state true or false, the CPCB, Central Pollution Control Board, provides air quality standards for ecologically sensitive areas also. Is this statement A true or B false? Okay, so we have true, another A. Okay, so the statement is true. The CPCB has gives provides standards for air quality control in ecologically sensitive areas also. Moving on, so parameters related with odor are abbreviated as A, FDIOL, B, DOLFI, C, FIDOL, or D, IDOLF. So we looked up at the parameters which are used for measuring the odor. So we had frequency, intensity, duration, location, and odor unpleasantness. Okay, so we have C as answer. So C is the correct answer. So these are Fidol factors. So it's frequency, intensity, duration, odor unpleasantness, and location with each of the description. So this is how you measure odor in a particular space. Moving on. So match the following global environmental timeline with the events which have happened. So group one is the year which is given, and group two is the event which has happened. Okay, so we have an answer C. Okay, so C is the correct answer. So in 2005, we had the Kyoto Protocol. 2004, Wangari Maathai Maathai became the first environmentalist which was awarded a Nobel Prize. In 2015, we had the Paris Agreement or COP21. And 2007 was the United Nations climate change in Bali. So P matches with 2, Q matches with 1, R matches with 4, and S matches with 3. So C is the correct answer. Moving on to the next question. So again, match the following. So, okay, I think we have considered this question before. So let's move on. So now let's match question 20. Let's match the definitions of the terms given in group 1 to the definitions given in group 2. So we have terms like governance, policy, and policy instruments. And we looked up at their definitions as well. Okay, so we have an answer C. Okay, another C. Okay, so C is the correct answer. So governance is the process whereby societies or organizations they make important decisions, determine who they are going to involve and how they are going to render account. So P matches with 3. Then policy is a statement of intent to change the behavior in a positive way. So Q matches with 1. And then policy instruments are the means or specific measures to translate the intent of a policy, the intent statement of a policy into action. So R matches with 2. So P matches with 3, Q matches with 1, and R matches with 2. So C is the correct answer. Moving on, the objectives of NAMP, the National Air Quality Monitoring Program of India, are the following. So first, to determine status and trends of ambient air quality. Two, to ascertain whether the prescribed ambient air quality standards are violated. Three, to identify non-attainment cities. And four, to obtain the knowledge and understanding necessary for developing preventive and corrective measures. So which of the following are the objectives of the National Air Quality Monitoring Program, which is a mandatory air quality air pollution measure guideline? Okay, so we have an answer D. Okay, we have another D. Okay, so D is the correct answer. That is the under NAMP, all of the four which we have stated are the objectives. So it determines the status and trends of ambient air quality. It ascertains whether the prescribed air quality standards are being violated or not. It identifies non-attainment cities, and it obtains knowledge and necessary for developing preventive and corrective measures. So all of these four statements are its objectives. So D is the correct answer. Moving on, so match the odor which is recognized as a nuisance in the industries under Schedule 1 Environment Protection Rules of 1986. So in group 1, we have the industry type, and in group 2, we have what sort of odor conditions are can be present or are acceptable. We have an answer C. Okay, another C. Okay. So for fermentation industries, which include distilleries, malteries, and breweries, all efforts should be made to remove any odor because these are all odor can be removed from all of these industries. Whereas natural rubber industries, odor should be absent. Then large pulp and paper mills, they use hydrogen sulfide, which is odorless. So this much concentration, 10 milligram per cubic meter of hydrogen sulfide smell is tolerable. So this is for the large pulp and paper mill because they use this they use this chemical. And then for coffee processing, there's no compliance norms. However, public complaints can be received. So P matches with 2, Q matches with 1, R matches with 4, and S matches with 3. So C is the correct answer. Okay. So now, since the deadline for week 1 assignment and week 2 assignment have passed, we will now discuss the solutions to these assignments. Uh, so let's move on. Transported dust is not directly responsible for which of the following? A. Human respiratory ailments. B. Fertilization of distant forests. C. Damaging infrastructure. Or D. Global warming. Pretty sure all of you have answered these questions at one point. Okay, so we have an answer D. Okay, we have an answer C. So transported dust is not directly responsible for which of the following? Okay, so D, global warming is the correct answer. Transported dust can lead to human respiratory ailments. If it goes through our breathing airway, it can fertilize distant forests because of the uh, pollinators and things which are present along with this. Then it damages infrastructure and causes friction and wear and tear if it's present on surfaces where it should not be present. But this is not directly related to global warming. So D is the correct answer. Moving on, state true or false. As per the IPCC 2014, human activities have caused human climate change and impacted ecosystems. They have transformed the Earth's natural systems, exceeding its capacity and disrupting their self-regulatory mechanism with irreversible consequences for global humanity. So, is this statement true or false? Okay, we have answers coming in as true. So, IPCC is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and they do these publications or reports where they look up at human activity or anthropogenic effect on climate change. So the statement is true. So A is the correct answer. Moving on, another state true or false. The normal extinction of species rate is assumed to be between zero point 0.1 and 1 species per 10,000 species per 100 years. This is known as the background rate of extinction. So is the statement true or false? Okay, so we have okay, another A is coming in. So the statement is true. This is the definition of the background rate of extinction. That is, the normal extinction of species rate is assumed between zero point 0.1 to 1, uh, between zero point 0.1 and 1 species per 10,000 species for per 100 years. So this is the statement is true. Moving on to question first, state true or false. Biomes are defined as a major ecological community of organisms adapted to a particular climatic or environmental conditions across a large geographical areas. Is the statement true or false? Okay, so yes, again, the statement is true. This is the definition of biomes where they have different sets of organisms which are adapted to a particular climatic condition in a geographical area. So A, true is the correct answer. Moving on, another true and false. So India is the third largest fish producing and second largest aquaculture fish producing country in the world. Is the statement true or false? Okay, so we have another A. So the statement is also true. Okay. Moving on to the next question. The process through which methyl mercury is passed along the food chain is called A. Bioaccumulation, B. Bioconservation, C. Bioacceleration, or D. Biomagnification. Okay, so we have an answer D and a B. Okay, another D. So this process is called biomagnification. So bioaccumulation is when organisms accumulate high concentration of mercury over time. That is bioaccumulation. And then magnification is when this what do you call it? This mercury concentration, methyl mercury, is being passed in the food chain. That process is known as biomagnification. So this happens like the algae are eaten by the zooplanktons, which are then eaten by small fishes, which are then eaten by bigger fishes. And at each step, the concentration of this methyl mercury increases because the all of these fish species have methyl mercury in them. Okay, so biomagnification is the correct answer. So D is the correct answer. Moving on to the next question. What are the key drivers of land change? One, urbanization, two, climate change, three, gentrification, and four, technology and innovation. Okay, so the key drivers of land change are urbanization, climate change, and technology and innovation. So we looked up at the various drivers and pressures on land resources, and these are the three which are mentioned in the options. Other than these three, we also have population growth and economic development, which drive pressure on land resources. Okay, so A, 1, 2, and 4 are the correct answers. Moving on to the next question. So, state true or false, as per the Desertification and Land Degradation Atlas of India, which is prepared by the Space Application Center for the period of 2011 to 2013, approximately 30% of the total geographical area of India is undergoing the process of desertification or land degradation. So, is this statement true or false? Okay, so we have an answer A, another A. Okay, another A. Okay, so this statement is true. Approximately 30% of the total geographical area of India is undergoing the process of desertification or land degradation, based on this report, which was for the period of 2011 to 2013. Okay, so moving on to the next question. So, state true or false, the term economic water scarcity is used where storage, treatment, and conveyance infrastructure are lacking. So, is the statement true or false? Okay, so we have another A. So the statement is also true. So the term economic water scarcity is definition is when storage, treatment, and conveyance infrastructure for water is lacking, then economic water scarcity is prevalent in that area. Okay, moving on. So match the theme in group A with their description in group B. Oh, I think I've not put the options for this. Okay, so let's just match them. So eutrophication is the process of natural aging process of lakes and wetlands, wherein they become enriched such that the nutrients and sediments they are more biologically productive and usually over a longer period of time. So if you see lakes and water bodies which are covered in green with algae or with vegetation, that is because it's overloaded with nutrients and sediments, and that is why uh, they appear so green. Okay, so eutrophication is the natural aging of lakes and wetlands because of this enriched nutrients and sediments. Okay, which make it more biologically productive. So, and organic pollutants are these microbial decomposition of liquid manure, sewage effluents, and sewage treatment sludge, and others, another such kind of waste which deplete oxygen concentration in water bodies. So those are organic pollutants. So Q matches with 1. Then heavy metals, they impact the plant growth, degrade water, groundwater contamination with arsenic, cadmium, nickel, mercury, chromium, zinc, and lead. So these are heavy metals which affect the water bodies. And then salinity is an increase in the quantity of dissolved minerals in the fresh water from the land use changes, agriculture, irrigation, drainage, lake evaporation, seawater intrusion, sea level rise, and water abstraction. So salinity is an increase in the quantity of the dissolved minerals. So S matches with 3. So this was for week 1. Now let's look up at week 2 assignment. Again, the deadline for week 2 assignment has also passed. So the first question is state true and false. So according to International Association for Impact Assessment, the IAIA, EIA is defined as the process of identifying, predicting, evaluating, and mitigating the biophysical, social, and other relevant effects of proposed development proposals prior to major decisions being taken and commitments made. So is the statement true or false? Okay, so we are getting a lot of truths. So this is the definition given by the IAIA for EIA. So this statement is true. So moving on, another true and false question. So EIA started in India in 1976 to 77 when the Planning Commission directed the Department of Science and Technology DST to assess the river valley projects from the point of view of environment. It was later extended for all those projects that required approval from the Public Investment Board. So is the statement true or false? Okay, so we have a lot of A's coming in. So again, the statement is also true. So EIA started in India in 1976 because the Planning Commission told DST to review all the projects from the perspective of environment. Okay, moving on. So the various EIA impact areas are A, biophysical impact, B, socio-cultural impact, C, health and safety, and D, economic and fiscal impacts. So it's a multi-select question. More than one options can be correct. Okay, so we have all. Okay, we have all again. Okay, so all of these are EIA impact areas on which we assess the impacts. We affect the impacts on all of these areas because of a project's development. So all are the correct answer. Moving on, another true and false question. So while assessing the impact on geology for the AIA procedure, the removal of geological layers and changes to the geomorphology are also looked upon. So is the statement true and false? Okay, so the statement is true. When we assess the geology for AIA studies, we see if any layers have been removed, and over the years have there been changes in the geomorphology of that area. So the statement is also true. Moving on, language impact assessment or LIA involves the systematic criteria-based assessment of the likely impacts of development or the project on language and community. So is the statement true or false? Okay, so the statement is also true. We see how the proposal or development in a particular area is affecting the language and community values of a particular of that particular area. So under language impact assessment, we do this study as well. So this statement is also true. Moving on, emerging and important criteria in EIA are A, equality, B, deprivation, C, culture and language, D, climate change, E, resettlement and livelihoods. So again, a multi-select question. More than one options can be correct. Okay, so all. Okay. So all of these are emerging and important criteria which we consider in EIA now. So all of these options are correct. Okay, moving on to the next question. So state true and false. The book Silent Spring, which was written in 1962, was written by Rachel Carson. Is the statement true or false? Okay, we have a lot of A's, so the statement is also true. Okay, so Rachel Carson wrote the book Silent Spring in 1962. Okay, moving on to the next question. The National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, in the USA was signed into law on January 1, 1970. So is this statement true or false? Okay, so we have a lot of A's again. So this statement is also true. So NEPA was signed in January 1, 1970. Okay, the United Nations, another true and false. United Nations established the United Nations Environment Program, UNEP, on 5th June 1972. Is the statement true or false? Okay, a lot of A's again. So the statement is also true. Okay. Then the last question. So the following picture represents which of the following options? A, culture of Uttarakhand, B, women empowerment, C, gender inequality, and D, Chipko movement. So a lot of D's coming in. So D is the correct answer. So Chipko movement was when the uh, people of this particular place, they hugged the trees, hence the term Chipko. They hugged the trees to prevent the development of that area. So again, Chipko movement played a very significant role in EIA being what it is today in India, and the general environmental awareness as well. Okay, so this is all which was discussed, which we are going to discuss in this week. Okay, so if you have any questions, since we did not receive any queries regarding this week's content in the discussion forums, we don't have any query section. So if you have any queries based on the content which we discussed and this week's content, you can either put it on the chat box or if you can just unmute yourself and ask. Okay, so if you don't have any queries, I think we are done with this session for today. So please make use of the discussion forums, and if you have any question when you are watching the videos, you can just put it in the ask a question session, uh, on the ask a question tab on the top of your NPTEL portal. So we regularly go through those to the Google group, and we try to bring these queries and these discussions. Also, if you would like to watch the previous week's recordings, they are now available on YouTube, both for Saturday as well as Tuesday lectures, and the material which we use. So the recording for this problem solving session as well as this material which I'm presenting will be made available in the problem solving session tab, which is on your left hand side of the portal. So thank you so much for attending this session, and hope to see you next time in the next Saturday session. Yes, please. Yes, if you have a suggestion, please. Radha Krishnan.
Madam, am I audible to you now?
Yes, yes, you are audible to me.
Madam, at the end of each lesson or each chapter, you are giving
Yeah.
some reference videos,
Yes.
links. See, what is happening
Yes,
is
yes.
for going through those videos,
Mm-hmm.
instead of going to each lesson and trying to collect those videos, is there any common place or common location or portal where I can access them depending subject wise, something like that?
Oh, so right now we don't have that, but I will give the suggestion to the course team and they can probably make a
Yes,
combined folder. Thank you. Thank you for your suggestion. I will make a note of this
definitely,
and
madam.
tell
Thank
the
you very much.
course.
Right.
Thank you. Okay. Does anybody have any other feedback or suggestions regarding the course or these problem solving sessions? Okay, so if there's nothing else, I will now close the session. Thank you so much for attending this session. And if you have any queries, please put them in the discussion forums. And uh, the videos will be available on YouTube and the slides as well. Okay. Thank you so much for attending. Thank you, sir. Okay, so I will now stop sharing and I will now close it for everybody.